In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. There is a subset of people who walk among us as if they are like the rest of us. These twisted individuals can almost come off as if they are part of the norm of society. These are the twisted individuals who enjoy puns. I am not going to ask you to identify yourselves, but I will say I am one of these individuals who enjoys puns. I'm going to share a few with you this morning. I'm reading a book about anti-gravity. I just can't put it down. I did a theatrical performance about puns. It was a play on words. I stayed up all night to see where the sun went. Then it dawned on me. I used to be addicted to the hokey pokey, but then I turned myself around. And finally, I used to hate facial hair, but then it grew on me. Now, there's a lot going on in our gospel lesson today, but I want to focus on the one section that shows us that the writer of the fourth gospel, that John was a punny guy. And this comes from the line, he uses a Greek word called anothen, which means both above and also again, as in one must be born from above or one must be born again. And different Christian traditions choose one or the other translation. Our translation here uses, the NRSV uses from above. However, I think it's worth looking at the place in between these two ideas, or maybe the place even that includes both of these ideas of being born from above and being born again. The closest thing I've seen in English that captures both of these ideas is the phrase from the top. Like, let's take it from the top, right? There's a sense of renewedness or newedness and a sense of something coming from above to below. When we think of this, of taking it from the top, of newness or againness, together with aboveness, we can see that this is a complex idea, this pun that John is making, and we can see how Nicodemus and even many Christians might get wrong what's happening in our text today. I think it's unlikely Jesus is talking about a moment in time. Speaking of which, I wanted to grow an herb garden, but I didn't have the time. Sorry, that was totally gratuitous. But when we think about time, and we think about what it means to be born of water and the Spirit, we often go back to a moment in time, right? In some rooms in the Christian household, that's some moment in time where one makes a declaration of faith as an adult and turns their life over to Jesus, right? I have friends from who are these types of Christians, and if you say to them, when did you begin living the life of the Spirit? They will say, it was March 8th, 2014 at 12:05 in the Kmart parking lot. Or maybe in their church, right? It's a moment where they made a decision. They had some peak experience, and it had an effect on their life. For many others in liturgical churches such as our own, it might be more common to say, well, I began living the life of the Spirit at my baptism. That was my initiation into the Christian family, and I've done my best ever on to continue living that life. There is validity to both statements. Right? It is very meaningful to be brought into the Christian household, whether as an infant or as a 90-year-old. And of course, all of us, through our faith journey, collect peak experiences that are meaningful, that help inform our life as we move forward. But here's the thing. If one or both of these ideas is what Jesus meant by saying we must be born of water and the Spirit, Nicodemus would have understood him. Because Nicodemus was the leader of the Jews. He was a religious professional. He knew, just as in infant baptism, how children were brought into Judaism on the 8th day, right? Males were brought into the temple and went through a ritual where they became part of the household of faith. He also would have known the idea of the, March 8th, 2014, 1205 idea, because there were those who converted to Judaism by baptism, actually, in those days, and other rituals. And so he would have been familiar with both the peak experience and the long-term membership idea of water and the Spirit. So the fact that we see quite clearly Nicodemus doesn't get it might mean that Jesus is looking at something even beyond or underneath both of those very valid and meaningful experiences of faith. So what does it mean to be born from above or to be born again? What if instead of looking back at a moment, whether that moment was whenever that moment was, if instead of looking back at a moment, being born of water and Spirit wasn't a moment, but was a modality of living. Wasn't a main event, but it was our everyday way of being. In some traditions, this way of being, this mindset is called beginner's mind. It refers to having an attitude of openness, eagerness, lack of preconceptions, right? Being astute and awake and present, with as many of the old tapes on pause as possible. One of my favorite sayings about beginner's mind comes from a Zen teacher, Shunryu Suzuki, who says, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are only a few." Perhaps taking it from the top includes an aspect of being ever new, ever a beginner, ever trying to see Jesus in our tradition and each moment of our lives with a fresh eye and a fresh heart. So let's try this a little bit as we approach God as Trinity on this Feast of the Holy Trinity. How do we look at God as Trinity with beginner's mind? Well, first, this would mean bracketing off the various metaphors or ideas we may have picked up or heard or been taught about God as Trinity. And this is a pretty good idea, especially since most of them, technically at least, are heretical. So, for instance, you may have heard the idea that, well, God is like H2O. There's steam, there's water, and there's ice. That's a heresy. You may have heard God is like three individuals in a dance. Taken to its extreme, that's a heresy too. So let's begin fresh. Trinity. God is one. God is three in one. Let's begin at the beginning. Why does it matter? Right? Why do elements of theology worked out 1800, 1700 years ago have meaning for us today? Well, I think it's because of what we hear in Romans today and what we hear in our gospel today, and that's that we are children of God. Right? And what that means is that we share in that nature of God. We partake in God's nature. And so what God is says something about who we are and how we can be with one another. Here's a great idea. It's kind of a scam, but I really like this idea. You know how you can take these DNA tests? Our son just did this, right? Where you swab your mouth and you send it and they tell you, hey, you're 4% Icelandic or something cool like that, right? I want to do a spiritual DNA test kit. And the cool thing about the spiritual DNA test kit is no matter what somebody sends in, they're going to get the same result. 100% God. That's where we come from. All right? So if our spiritual DNA test kit is telling us this, it matters what God is like. Now, there's a lot of theology written about the Trinity. Some of it's very boring and inapplicable to life, and the rest of it isn't understandable. That's a joke. But beginning with beginner's mind, we can say this: three that are one and one that is three is mysterious. Not mysterious as in we don't have enough clues to figure it out as an object of our investigation. Mysterious as in its very essence, it's not something we will ever wrap our arms around. And that's frustrating to our postmodern way of thinking, but it's also really meaningful, I think, because if you think about the things that make it worth getting out of bed in the morning, they're all mysteries that we can't wrap our heads around or wrap our arms around. We can describe them, but we can't fully explain them. Things like love, beauty, purpose, forgiveness, even being alive. So it doesn't make sense that the nature of God would mirror the nature of what's most magnificent in our world and in our lives, of what makes our hearts leap, even if we're left scratching our heads. So mystery is at the heart of who God is. And so we come to this mystery of three persons in one God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And the neat thing about the Trinity, about three persons, is that neither speaks about three nor about persons. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, these three aspects of God, I hesitate to say person because the way we use the word person is not what's meant here theologically. Because Father, Son, and Holy Spirit all have one single nature and one single will. And so we can't separate them. They don't have different job descriptions. One thing you may hear in some churches is people trying to avoid some of the masculine gender language of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, who also somehow seems to get masculine pronouns, will say Creator, Redeemer, and Sanctifier. The issue with that is that makes it sound like God the Father creates, while the other two are on Memorial Day holiday. God the Son is the Redeemer, and then the Holy Spirit shows up at some point to sanctify us. That's not how the Trinity works, right? All are one. It's a mystery. So the beginner's mind version, at least to me, is to simply say Trinity is about relationship. Relationship and interdependence. God is not a monolith. God is not a lone monarch. God is not a lonely prime unmoved mover. Or an impersonal principle or force. There's not Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. There's Father of the Son, Son of the Father, Spirit from the Father, Spirit of the Son. And if this relationality at the very nature and heart of God is true of God, then it's true of us too. Three persons. One can't count spirits. At our Bible study, I did an impression of the Sesame Street counting the members of the Trinity. I'm not going to do that from the pulpit, but that is a little advertisement to come to Bible study. But it is true that we cannot count spirits, and so three in the Trinity isn't about a number, it's about an essential reality, which is that the unity of God is founded not upon uniformity, but upon diversity. A unity that is a diversity. And again, this says something about what human community is meant to look like. So just as the persons of the Trinity are not distinct individuals, nor are we. We are interpersonal. We flow one into the other and into God. No matter how much emotional or psychological armor we may have put around ourselves as we've grown up, we are not isolated. We can't be. Our texts are clear about that we come from God. Paul talks about us being siblings with one another and children of God. We're part of one great family. In the Gospel of John later, the same gospel we read from today, Jesus prays that we will abide in him, that he will abide in us just as he abides in the Father. The boundaries are very, very fuzzy. And so if we approach the idea of the Trinity with beginner's mind, if we abandon mathematical or logical engagement with what is actually mystery, and instead lead with the heart and see it relationally, We find that the Trinity tells us quite a lot about ourselves. I want to go back just in closing to our original pun, the idea of taking it from the top, of being from above and anew or being born again. I think what Jesus is saying about us is that we can live this way all the time. Every experience, at least in principle, can be a peak experience. Every bush is a burning bush. Everything that happens, it can elicit from us that great response of Isaiah, right? Here am I, hineni, right? I am fully present and alive to what is happening. We're invited to enter the mystery. We can enter the mystery even if we don't like puns. Even if we think puns, like German sausage, are the worst.